Now, in terms of the question of rights, Hobbes doesn't really go that far beyond Grotius. And so he doesn't have a developed conception of rights. By developed, I mean he doesn't have a Lockean conception where there are numerous rights. Instead, there's really just one singular right, which is the right of self-preservation. And so that really is the sole right. There is the right of self-preservation. So that means that nothing should be claimed as a right which doesn't contribute to this. So Hobbes is not talking about the kind of totally free and autonomous person that develops much later. This idea that you have a right to do absolutely anything you want to your own body, right? The right of bodily autonomy or something like that. Hobbes does not affirm anything like that. So if you were to, use harmful substances that are going to hurt your body, you would not have a right to do that because that's like the opposite of the fundamental right, which is self-preservation. And so you don't have a right to do things which are going to harm your own self-preservation or the preservation of other people in maintaining that same right. If there is any good in society or conception of a common good, it really arises from this principle. So if there is a common purpose of the state, it really is to protect the right of self-preservation. And that really is the sole function or purpose of the state. The other things the state does are really just outgrowths of that. And for Hobbes, as he looks at religiously divided England, religiously divided Germany, and other parts of Europe at this time, as he looks at these various conflicting ideologies, he says that really underneath all of these ethical, religious, philosophical fluctuations, there is this underlying principle, which is that there is this internal desire to preserve one's own self. And so if that lies underneath the fluctuations, if it's like the only unchanging thing underneath them, then that means that it's something that's more sustainable than the fluctuating theological commitments of a person or group of people. Hobbes says people are easily manipulated, and they're manipulated into changing their philosophical or religious views all the time. But people aren't as easily manipulated to give up this right of self-preservation. So it seems to be more beyond manipulation than you see with these other things. Well, this then leads to the idea of the social contract. The state, for Hobbes, is formed as a contract that is made between individuals. And so a number of individuals in the state of nature come together and they realize that it is in their best interest to create a contractual arrangement that is going to protect their lives, and it will also consequently protect the lives of the other people who are involved in this contractual arrangement. So it's a mutually beneficial agreement. Government, or the legitimacy of government, does not come from any divine source. Authority is delegated by the people to the magistrate, but it is not received from above, right? So God does not give a divine stamp of approval to the leaders of a state. So there is no divine authority that is underlying human political authority. Instead, human political authority is simply handed to certain people by means of a contract. The ultimate goal is that people stop hurting each other. It's based on compromise, and so it's recognized that in order to preserve your life, you're going to have to compromise. Because in order to preserve your life, you're going to have to make an agreement to say, okay, well, my life will be preserved, and in turn, if you don't hurt me, I won't go steal your chickens. So you're going to have to make these arrangements where if you don't want someone to do something to you, you're also going to have to make an agreement that you're not going to do the same thing to them. And so it benefits everybody that you agree to all of these things. And so it's this social contract that then creates the state. It's based on compromise and the right of private judgment. And this is really important here. The right of private judgment is essentially given up and handed to somebody else. Because it's private judgment that's caused all these religious conflicts in the first place. Everybody says, well, they've studied and they see the historical evidence of that the papacy is valid. And another group says they look at the historical evidence and say the papacy is not a historical institution and it's not valid. And someone says that scripture teaches this, someone says that. So these are all issues of private judgment. I know Rome likes to say, like Roman Catholics like to say, well, we gave up private judgment when we submitted to the Pope. And yes, but you also need to use private judgment to determine if the Pope's claims are valid or not. There's private judgment in all of this. We all have to deal with private judgment in some way. And so Hobbes says, well, we just give that up altogether for the sake of preserving our ultimate right, which is to preserve our own lives. And so we say, all right, I'm not going to privately determine what's right or wrong. I just give that to the state and they tell me and I believe whatever they tell me. That's fine. And it's in my best interest because it protects my life, which is really all that really matters. Then we have, with the social contract, Hobbes says there are two different realities created. We have the commonwealth, which is the people, those who are living in mutual agreement to be at peace. And then we have also, this consequently creates a sovereign, because this contract needs someone to actually delegate authority and judgment to. And that becomes the individual who is in charge of the state. And so if this individual who is in charge is enforcing the contract, if that's being enacted, then the right to self-preservation is no longer threatened. And because Hobbes has said, well, people generally are just going to leave each other alone, that's the nature of humanity, as long as they're not threatened, then it's going to achieve peace. Because if there's some external force that's preserving your life, you really have no reason to go attack or hurt anybody else. This leads to, I think, a dilemma really for Hobbes, which is the question of well, why keep the contract? Because he's made the argument that within the state of nature, people deceive each other all the time. People just harm each other, and they don't really have seemingly any concern for who they deceive or who they harm or who they hurt, as long as they get what they want in order to perpetuate their own life. People really are so selfish by nature in this way. And if people are willing to deceive others or lie so much without any concern, why is anyone bound to keep the contract? Right? Why is anybody keeping the contract at all? Why does anybody trust anyone else to keep this contract? Because in any situation, I'm sure you can imagine that there are times where your life might be better preserved by not doing what the magistrate says or not keeping your end of the contract. So you might say you're keeping your end of the contract, but you might in the middle of the night, go and steal your neighbor's chickens because you still want more food. Why wouldn't that happen? Why is it that anybody is trusted at all? Why does anybody trust anybody else's word to actually keep this contract in place? Hobbes' answer is part of his anthropological conception here, which is just, well, if somebody keeps their end of the bargain, you're probably going to do it too, as long as you're not directly threatened. What about the first person? There's just this kind of maybe mutual trust in each other, but where does the mutual trust exactly come from? So John Locke is going to deal with this question. And he proposes that there is a necessity in a theistic belief. There's a necessity in belief in God for all citizens. Because he says, well, if all there is the temporal order, and people don't really care about deceiving each other, there is no reason to trust anybody to keep their end of the bargain at all. So Locke says, well, you have to have a conception of deity. And so you have to believe in God in some sense, because if you have a conception of God, that God cares about you keeping your word, and there might be eternal consequences for you not keeping your end of the bargain. And so that kind of gives impetus for people to actually stick to their word, which is why Locke argues that atheists should all be exiled.